Happy Friday, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Friday, October 31st. Why am I saying happy Friday? I should say happy Halloween, Ohio State fans. But it's all treats, no tricks here on the 11 Dubcast. And I'm joined once again by our deputy editor at 11 Warriors to preview tomorrow's Ohio State versus Penn State game, Mr. Dan Hope. Dan, what you're gonna dress up for Halloween, I hope, right? You've got a whole elaborate costume
I was just
plan.
thinking I forgot my costume. At least I got the colors right, though. I got the Halloween colors going.
I couldn't tell if that was a scarlet or an orange Under Armour
It is
shirt,
an
but
orange, so it's a festive color for Halloween.
yeah, okay. Now that you
I'm
mentioned
just
it,
dressed like a
I am
pumpkin.
seeing. Yeah, there you go. Well, as I said, no tricks, only treats. So we are going to get to what we've all been waiting for all week, the long coveted rivalry game that is a rivalry game with a not a rival, depending on how you like to look at Penn State. This was the most anticipated game on the regular season schedule, perhaps, for Ohio State going into the season. I think some things have changed since then, but we will get into those momentarily before we give our final score predictions for the game itself. Before we do that, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at the 11 Dubcast and 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to workday, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. So here we are, Dan, the eighth game on Ohio State's schedule. The preseason number 2 team, Penn State. This is the one everyone's been waiting for. It opened as I think Ohio State was only 3.5-point favorites, so very, very close game. Actually, you know what? I've just been informed that Penn State's on a 4-game losing streak. James Franklin's been fired. Drew Aller suffered a season-ending injury a handful of weeks ago, and Ohio State is now 20.5-point favorite. So this went from arguably the most anticipated game during the regular season for Ohio State to just another game against a regular season opponent. That being said, the one storyline that hasn't changed coming into this game that we spoke about a couple episodes on the show ago is obviously the return of Jim Knowles to Columbus, something that even Ryan Day himself acknowledged this week. And there's certainly still some sour grapes that we both seem to anticipate are going to shape how this game unfolds. That being said, both of these teams are coming out of bye weeks. And one reason that you and I have both been cautiously skeptical of what Ohio State will have to do when they play UCLA a couple weeks from now is when a team fires a coach midseason the way that UCLA did, sometimes there can be a galvanizing effect around the team. And that certainly was the case with UCLA just a handful of weeks after they let Deshaun Foster go. They were able to deliver one of the upsets that ultimately led to the dismissal of James Franklin from Penn State. So you wonder if there's going to be a sort of similar effect for Penn State here, given this is going to be the only second game since they let James Franklin go. They only lost to Iowa on the road by a single point. Granted, there was a blocked field goal at the end of the half that they returned for a touchdown that made that game a little bit closer than otherwise it would have been, barring that sort of freak touchdown occurrence. You know, those don't tend to happen very often. Perhaps that game doesn't look as close as it otherwise ended up. That being said, I'm wondering if you are anticipating any sort of I guess, do you think that maybe Penn State's being a little bit disrespected or underestimated given the circumstances going into this? Or do you think the expectations are appropriately set both for Ohio State and Penn State that this is a wounded Nittany Lion, if you will, and given the aggressive Ohio State team that we have seen of late, that they should continue to just run over a team that frankly doesn't seem like it's going to be able to hang with it and is dealing and grappling with a lost season?
Well, I wouldn't say they're being disrespected. I mean, they've lost 4 games in a row. What respect do they really deserve, right? But, I think Ryan Day said all the right things this week. He said it's still a matchup game. They're still one of the most talented teams in the country. And I mean, like, On paper, I'd agree with that. I mean, the results have not been there. I know that, Chase Brown and I were laughing about a little bit on Thursday on Ryan Day's radio show. He was saying, they're still the same team other than a couple of pieces. Well, those couple of pieces are the head coach and the quarterback. So two pretty important pieces there that were supposed to be a part of his team that are no longer a part of his team. But, to your point about the galvanizing effect, you have to think coming off a bye week, a full week really for Terry Smith to get situated. The first game against Iowa, he's thrown into the fire. He becomes interim coach on a Sunday and they got to go play on a Saturday. Now they've had a couple of weeks to kind of coalesce around this new setup. And so you got to think Penn State's going into this game. I mean, this is their Super Bowl at this point. I mean, this and Indiana next week, like that's what they've got to play for at this point. They are not going to the college football playoff. All the Big Ten and national championship goals that we're talked about before the year, those are completely off the table. So the only thing they have left to play for is to pull off a big upset in one of the next 2 weeks. And so you got to think, especially with a bye week, they're going to have some wrinkles up their sleeve. They're going to throw the kitchen sink at Ohio State trying to make something happen. And I think because of that, like, I won't be surprised if this game is competitive early, even if Penn State takes an early lead. They do something that catches Ohio State off guard. I think all of that is possible, but I think when you project it out over a game as a whole, pound for pound, the way these teams have played this year, Ohio State has very clearly been the better team than Penn State. And so for Ohio State to be a 20.5-point favorite, that was actually, I remember somebody had texted me like a week before because there was kind of some social media stuff going around because people saw the lines on one of the betting websites that aggregates lines. And it's like, Ohio State's only a 3.5-point favorite. Like, no, those lines are from August. Like, they just haven't been updated yet. And I had said at the time, 20.5, that's what I thought made sense to me. It actually started at 17.5, has gone up to 20.5. To me, that's about right. Like, you got to give Penn State some credit to think like they can keep this game somewhat competitive, but based on the way these teams have played, especially over the past month, it makes sense for Ohio State to be a free score favorite.
Yeah, I have to say I think I've been guilty of sending you a preseason line a couple of times, not just for Ohio State games, but when just for college football generally. And you've talked me down a little bit in terms of I think this is probably from a couple months ago, and the aggregator or whatever just hasn't been updated yet. I remember that happened with the Washington game, and then it came out no, this was actually what the line was supposed to be. It wasn't a preseason line, and we were all just shocked that it was as shallow as it ended up being against Washington. There were more than a few people on the Dubcast that week that said that was free money, and Ohio State did end up covering pretty thoroughly. Speaking of betting lines, I do think that one of the interesting data points coming into this game is how both of these teams have fared against the spread this year. And it's one of the things that guided my scoring prediction this week. Ohio State is half a point against Ohio away from being undefeated against every spread it has faced this year. They still beat Ohio by 28 points. They just didn't cover 28 and a half, which is really why they tend to line it in a lot of cases by, being a field goal and then half a point, or a given number of touchdowns and then half a point, so that they're pretty sharp in terms of nailing it right on how many scores they think or the books think a given game is going to be separate from. But Ohio State has covered handily in just about every other game it's played this year. The same cannot be said for Penn State. Penn State, up until the Iowa game, had not beaten the spread once. That includes every game in which they were a favorite. Then they were underdogs against Iowa, and they finally covered. But again, that was a case in which they lost by 1 point, and they had a blocked field goal return for a touchdown at the end of the first half of that game. If that does not take place, then they presumably lose that game by
And also
much
worth
more than
noting,
3.5
they
points.
had the lead late in that game, could have won that game, then gave up a 67-yard run to Iowa's quarterback.
Right. Oh my goodness. So yeah, a lot of freak occurrences in that game in more ways than one. Always an adventure when you're talking Iowa football. Sometimes not the most exciting adventure, but I think that certainly that game overall might have been an exception. But that being said, you take some of those freak occurrences away. Penn State's just as close to being winless against the spread this year as Ohio State is being undefeated against the spread. And looking at those trends, it's hard for me to think that this game goes any other way, despite the fact that I kind of tend to agree with you that given the vibes around Penn State right now and the fact that both of these teams are coming out of a bye and that you have to imagine that even though Ohio State will probably be taking this game very seriously and Ryan Day is going to want to make a statement against Jim Knowles, you still have to imagine that Penn State, this is the most important thing they have left in terms of something that might just give them a little bit of salvage in their season, much the same way that Michigan came correct against Ohio State when they played a year ago. Like, all of that in consideration, I don't see why Ohio State wouldn't find another cover yet again this week if they come out as aggressive as we both seem to think that they will. So I said 38-7. I've gone away from my usual rule that guided me last season of assuming that Ryan Day is never going to kick field goals and that he's always going to go for it on fourth down, because we've seen Ohio State much more comfortable with settling for field goals, at least in the earlier stages of the game throughout this season. So I've usually been budgeting a field goal. And while I don't expect Penn State, given the fact that Aller's no longer their quarterback and they've got the hometown kid from Columbus now running the show for them, I don't think he's going to have a career breakout performance under these circumstances or anything. I would expect Penn State, given that they have been somewhat weakened offensively, to not be the second team this year to break double digits on Ohio State. Not everybody feels the same as me. I don't think you do based on your scoring prediction. That being said, you're a little bit more offensively optimistic than even I am. And I'm more optimistic than, frankly, we're both a little bit more optimistic than most of the other staff at 11 Warriors about how much Ohio State is going to be able to perform on offense in this game. So I did kind of just, I didn't outright spoil it, but I did just kind of tease a little bit in terms of what you're expecting here. But if you listen to the Tuesday show, you've already heard Dan say that he expects pedal to the metal in this one. What is your final score prediction for this one, Dan?
I'm going 41-10. I'm actually the only one on the staff who has Ohio State scoring more than 40, which usually I'm not the one on the staff to have the highest score prediction, but it goes back to that. And, when I kind of think about how I see this game playing out in my mind, I feel like it's close for a first quarter, maybe part of, I could see it being like, 10-7 or something like early in the second quarter, either way. And then I think Ohio State starts to pull away before halftime. And then I think they really pull away in the second half. And, I was originally like, Dan, I go like 35, 38 for Ohio State. I ultimately went 41 because I thought to myself, this is one of those games. If this was against Wisconsin last week in the middle of a fourth quarter, they're running out the clock. Maybe Lincoln Keenels is in there. They're not really trying to score. They're just trying to finish the game. Whereas in this game, I think late in the fourth quarter, even if they're up 3-4 scores, I think they're trying to go score another touchdown because I think they're trying to make a point against Jim Knowles. And so that's why I have Ohio State going 41 points in this game to Penn State's 10.
Yeah, and I'm only like 3 points shallower than you, so it's not like you're sitting up at the mountaintop of the scoring predictions alone in your own assessment this week. Me and a handful of other people are somewhere around there. You are the only one that broke 40 points, but yeah, I mean, you give or take a field goal, we're basically in the same boat, not only in terms of Ohio State's expectations, but also Penn State's expectations. That being said, you'll be able to read all of our scoring predictions when those go live 3 hours before kickoff on Saturday. If you're curious about how the rest of the experts and Ohio State football aficionados at 11 Warriors expect this one to go. And there is a little bit more staff disagreement on this game than there traditionally has been, I think, this season. We're all usually around in the same boat. I know everybody picked them to cover against Wisconsin. A handful of us, including yours truly, even picked them to shut out Wisconsin outright. So there's usually more agreement than not. But this one, there's a little bit more of a mix, and people are pretty split about whether or not Ohio State's going to cover on this one. But you've got two very optimistic reads from me, or Dan and I, rather, here on the Dubcast. And Yeah, I don't know, barring some freak circumstance or Penn State really, really playing spirited in wake of Frames Jenkins' dismissal. I think that Ohio State's probably on track to get another win against the spread and one of its more resounding wins over its not a rival in Penn State in several, many years. And it won't be a happy homecoming for Jim Knowles in Columbus. Boo hoo. Oh well. But yeah, we have that to look forward to with Big Noon kickoff this coming weekend, Saturday, and then I believe we'll be taking on Purdue the week after this. Is that right? So yeah, and you know those road trips to West Lafayette are always we always look forward to those as Ohio State fans. They're always so much fun. We can only hope that they'll flex the game to a night game and make it even more exciting for us. So not for the beat, obviously. I know you guys would probably prefer an earlier one, but I would imagine that game probably stays in
1
around in
p.m. a
daylight.
rare 1 p.m. kickoff.
That's right.
An NFL kickoff time for that one next week on Big Ten Network.
Yeah, and of course, NFL expectations for that game as well in terms of competitiveness, surely. But yeah, well, one game at a time. We've still got Penn State to look forward to this weekend, and then we'll have Purdue the following week. But we'll be back Monday morning with Chase Brown to recap all of the excitement that happens in the Penn State game that is taking place tomorrow. And we'll be back regularly next week throughout the week to break down everything coming out of that game, tease a new episode of Film Study from Jones, the return of Film Study from its 1 week hiatus, and then break down the Purdue game at the end of the week. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. Dan, good luck to you and the rest of the beat tomorrow covering the Penn State game. And yeah, we look forward to talking to you more next week. Go Bucks. Take care, folks.